Welcome back. In this video, we're going to begin turning our mud shader into a node group. So the first step here is to decide which nodes and which inputs and outputs we need to be dealing with when we create our node group. Now let's look at our inputs first of all. At the moment, the only node that's really generally going into all our different areas is this texture coordinate node. Now to make this a little bit easier to plug into our node group, I'm going to use Shift, right click and drag, and just create a redirect point, and I can just move that there. Now it's going to be a lot easier to plug this into our group input. If we look at the right side of our node tree, you can see that we have 4 noodles going into our principled and material outputs, and that's going to be our first 4 outputs for our node group. And I think that's all we have to deal with just now. Just grab everything apart from the last 2 nodes and that first node. We can use Ctrl G, and that will turn everything into a node group. So you can see now we have this group output node. And on the other side, let's just zoom out and move in, we have this group input node. Now to make things a little bit easier in this portion of the video, I'm going to full screen this shader editor using Control Spacebar. And that just gives me a little bit more space to work. I'll hit N to open up the side panel and go into the group tab. Now we know we have one input so far, and it's our vector. So we'll click on this input, we'll go to name, and we're going to name that vector. Now we don't have to worry about changing default values or minimum and maximum for this vector node. We'll go to our group output, and we can see that our diffuse color is going into this second result and our roughness is going into this first one. Let's deal with that just now. So over here we have our outputs. This first result is actually roughness. We're going to change the type from color to float, and we're going to change the name to roughness. And let's just give this a default value of 0.5, although we're pretty much always going to be having a map coming out of that point. But we might as well change that anyway. We'll change the minimum to 0 and the maximum to 1, 2, just to keep everything right. I also want to take this second result, which is our diffuse color. We'll just call that diffuse. And we'll use these little arrows to move those up. So now they're in the correct order. We'll take this displacement and we'll move it down. Again, I'm not going to worry about changing any defaults or minimum maximum for normal or displacement. Now there are a couple of other maps that we might want to use here as well. The first one is in our displacement mix. Before we go into displacement, we actually have our height output. So it might be useful having that height map. So we'll plug that in there. We'll change this result to a float, and we'll change the name to height. We also have this less than node, which is our puddle mask. Let's grab that and plug that in here. Scroll down and find value and change this to puddle mask. And I think that's okay for our outputs just now. Now for our inputs, we have a couple of different options. Now the first thing I want to do is do an overall scale. If we go into a converter, vector math, and just plug this in here, and we change this to scale. Now we have this value of 1, and we can plug this in here, and this scale input is going to be our vector scale. At the moment it's a default of 1. I'm going to change the minimum to 0 and the maximum to, let's say, 10. And now we have an overall scale. So if we come out this group input by hitting tab, we'll just move these nodes a little bit closer together. You can see what we have. We have this node group called node group. We'll change the name of that. We'll change its label to mud. We also have this part in here, which we can also change to mud as well. If we just come out of full screen by either clicking on back to previous or using Control Spacebar, we can get our render view back up. Now if I change this scale, you can see the scale of our mud also changes. Now when we get to really extreme values, you can see we're not quite getting the same effect on our mud. The main reason for that is the displacement height isn't being changed as we change our scale. So that's the next thing that we're going to look at. We'll take that scale back to 1. We'll hit Tab to go into our node group. And just to make things a little bit easier, let's grab this group input and move it over here. Now let's take our displacement scale and plug it in here. And we'll change the name of that. Displacement scale. Again, minimum 0, maximum, I think in this case, probably 10 or so would be fine. The next thing is, let's try this bump strength. Grab that and plug that in here. We're going to call this normal strength, not bump strength. Even though it comes from a bump node, it's actually part of our normal map. And I think that's going to be fine for the moment. Okay, so let's deal with our color. So we've already dealt with our vectors, our scale, our displacement scale, and our normal strength. So it's time to deal with color. Let's just grab a bunch of these different colors and plug them in. And we do have quite a few different colors involved in our material at the moment. We might as well just plug them all in. Now we do have puddle color and our underlying color. Now the underlying color, I think I want to make things a little bit easier. And let's just look at this output and this output. I think just to make things a bit easier, I'm going to take this output here and plug it into this dark value. Okay, so that's one less color to deal with now. Now this is a light color, this is going to be our puddle color. So I'm going to plug that in there. So now we have quite a few different nodes that we have to deal with. Okay, so it's challenge time. So just a quick challenge. Your challenge now is to rename these new inputs. So try and use meaningful names so the node group is easier to use. So pause the video and have a go at that, and join me in a few moments and I'll show you how I would rename them. Okay, welcome back. So I hope you did that challenge and you managed to give all those different inputs different names. Now this first input here is our puddle color. So let's change that first. These other colors here, let's just put in high in front of these two values, high A and high B, and change this one to low. So let's just come out of that node group and look at our result. So our mud still looks the way it should look. Let's zoom in, let's change that scale a little bit. We can increase and decrease our displacement a little bit as well. We can increase or decrease our normal strength to get more or less of an effect. We have some good control there. Let's change our puddles. Let's make them kind of dirty green color. See how that affects things. You can see we're still getting our dispersion at the edges there. Okay, so we have pretty much finished the first step of our node group. In the next video, we are going to deal with controls for our water level. So I'll see you in the next video.